Chancellor Olaf Scholz is currently visiting China. His second visit since November 2022. Also, the first major Western leader to visit China this year. What's on the agenda for the visit and what outcomes are both sides looking for, especially against the backdrop of the ongoing EU investigations into Chinese EVs and continued talks in the EU of de-risking with China? Joining me for the second half are Ma Zhenzhou, attorney at law based in Germany, and Professor Yin Bag from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Welcome to the show. So Yin, thank you for joining us. Sitting in London, if you look at German-China relationship, what do you make of this latest trip to China? Basically more than a year, and the second trip of the Chancellor Scholz.
I think there's a very simple answer, which is that Germany regards China as a significant export market, and it has done for many years. It's one of Germany's biggest export destinations, and Chancellor Scholz will be very keen to underpin that relationship to make sure it isn't damaged by the rhetoric that he hears from across the Atlantic and from certain European partners who are more suspicious of China. He will also want to ensure that German investors have the possibility to invest in China without some of the constraints that have appeared in the past. So these two things, exports and investment, are the critical aspects of his mission.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ma, if you look at the trip, obviously accompanying the Chancellor, the three ministers, and also a large business group. Do you agree with Yin that the trip is mostly about trade investment between the two countries? So, and also, since you are based in Germany, I would like to have your response, your opinion about what's the domestic response in Germany about the trip.
Yes, I fully agreed. It is very important to keep the game on. It is really a very encouraging step of Mr. Scholz, and I think many German friends who are engaged in promoting Sino-German relationship will share my joy. My hope is the game must go on, because between China and Germany, it is a successful story for so many years and for both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, of course, if you look at pure trade relationship, economic relationship, the two countries, obviously, for example, Germany has been critically important to the Chinese economy, and China also the largest trading partner of Germany for consecutive, several years, 8 years. So, of course, the visit, taking place against the backdrop of course, in the U.S. Strained relation with China and U.S.-EU talk of de-risking from China. What do you make of it if you look at the probably factors affecting relationship and also factors strengthening, calling for a reinforcement of these ties here?
Well, Germany and China relationship is very special among the China-EU relationship. I mean, most of it is anchored on a very large and flourishing trade relationship. Germany holds tremendous influence within the European Union. And I think at a very fundamental level, both countries don't have anything really sort of in conflict or in contending against each other in political arena. China and EU relationship is certainly damaged to some extent due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But after all, I think German companies are doing great here in China. I do want to make a point about the automobile industry. As we know that the electric car exports from China to Europe is really taking off. But I think we shouldn't really sort of frame this issue in the context of us against them, or Chinese cars versus European cars. That's not the right way to look at it. I mean, I just give you one example. I mean, Volkswagen has extensive cooperation, joint ventures with Chinese companies, and also including in electric vehicle area. In Hefei, instead of Hefei, Anhui province, there's a joint venture between Volkswagen and a Chinese company, and they're actually building electric cars. So I think the cooperation between the two sides and particularly in my view, in the electric vehicle arena, is really going to generate benefits for both sides. So I think I'm very glad to see that Mr. Schultz has taken a stance that he is opposed to banning electric car imports from China, and I think he makes the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ian, making the right decision, Schultz remarked in an interview, basically in responding to this investigation into the so-called subsidy behind the Chinese EVs. He said in the interview, quote, he's not convinced of the necessity for the EU to impose tariffs on Chinese EVs. He emphasized that, direct quote here, our economic model should not be based on protectionism, but on the attractiveness of our products. How is it different from, say, other European leaders? How big is the gap? And is there any compromise, of probably working over these differences?
I think there are two or three things to say in response to that. One is, yes, it's certainly the case that Germany regards free trade as central to its global model. And if it tries to undermine free trade or accepts the pressure from other EU countries to undermine free trade, Germany will be damaged, not just in its China exports, but elsewhere. But the second thing is that Germany is worried. It's facing a very difficult economic time because of the impact of higher energy prices. German manufacturing has to face much higher energy prices than in China or even in France. So Germany is concerned about losing market share because its cost base is so much higher. So it's pulled in different directions in this regard as well. And the third thing is that the EV story is one in which, yes, there's cooperation between Volkswagen and Chinese manufacturers, but Germany is vulnerable now to the high costs, and its concern will be that if it doesn't do something to shore up its capabilities in EV manufacturing, it could start to lose market share in what could eventually be quite a dramatic loss of that market share. That's what worries many in Germany. Scholz is trying to ride two horses. He wants to be friendly to China, but he also wants to be friendly with his European partners, including on things like whether or not there should be curbs, if not tariffs, on EVs. There is, in the background, the elephant in the room, which is called Trump.
Yeah.
And if he starts imposing tariffs, then we get into an entirely different story.
Okay. Go on, Ian. How much big change there will be if Trump comes back to the White House?
Well, he's threatening immediately to impose tariffs, and those tariffs will be on China, or more strongly on China than other parts of the world. And therefore, China is going to be looking for alternative markets. And that's where the story about Chinese subsidies could reemerge and say, right, China's been thwarted in its attempts to sell to the US because of Trump. China therefore has to turn elsewhere, and it will use subsidies to undercut European producers. So there's a very delicate story emerging on all these fronts.
Okay. So, Mr. Ma, obviously there are different opinions, in particular in the industries, in the market, for example, the business community. Some people are calling for more investment in China. Others probably see China as, a strong competitor. We need to take some cautions or measures against that. So what do you make of that? What's this, how likely that will influence probably the choice or the decision-making of the governments?
Let me point out two keywords: risk and de-risk. To be honest, there's nothing new under the sun. We have this kind of discussions in Germany over and over again. Mm-hmm. Maybe the best answer is from former Siemens CEO von Pierer. He said, the risk of not being in China is far bigger than the risk of being there. So this is a quite reasonable opinion.
Interesting point over there, John. Of course, this is also, I think, sort of like the Chinese view that, in the process of de-risking, actually, it creates a huge risk of kind of like deglobalization, less trade, less investment, both sides suffer from that.
Well, the European argument about de-risking is based on the diversity argument. When we say risk, what risk is that? The standard version over there is that the risk associated is too much reliant on China, such that the supply chain could be vulnerable in some events. This has nothing to do with geopolitics. This has nothing to do with ideology. This has nothing to do with other sort of political factors. It's purely a business argument. And if it is a business argument, I think the government shouldn't step in and make decisions on behalf of the companies. I mean, the CEOs of these companies know this much better than these politicians about the business risk associated with too much relying on China and the risks presented to the supply chain. So I think, I would suggest that let's leave these decisions to the company executives. Let's not interfere with a government hand. And I think what the CEO of Siemens said makes an absolute lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ian, should the government shouldn't the government leave this business or decision making in the hands of the CEOs of the business people here?
Well, there's some truth to that, but there's another side to it, which is that the concern in Germany and in several other countries which are looking to improve their relations with China is that of the level playing field. Are they treated on similar terms to Chinese competitors or indeed to other rivals from other parts of the world? And that concern about the level playing field is part of the risk story. It's really only at the political level that assurances can be put in place that the market in which you're competing is open and free to all in a way which doesn't favor certain producers.
Okay.
The allegation about China
this
is
story
that it's
about
unfair
level
and
playing field is so still right now. I mean, just talk to the people. Talk to BMW, for example. You go to BMW's operation in the city of Shenyang. The Chinese government and the local city government goes out of way to help BMW to be successful in that city. On the other, if not the opposite, in my view, I think the level playing field is turning against Chinese companies in that context. So I think, this old idea about level playing field is really a stale story, and I think people should get up to date about what's the real situation here in China.
Well, on that tone, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.